And on to our second guest this week. We're joined by Oliver Friesen, CEO of Golden Metal Resources. Welcome back, Oliver. How's life?
Yeah, things are good, Phil and Kevin. Good to speak to you guys again. It was a good end of summer, but we're looking forward to September and typically what's a much busier season for the junior resource space. So exciting times ahead.
Yeah, very good. I mean, obviously, since we last talked, there's been a few announcements, but let's just wind back to sort of the first day of dealings. I think it was the 10th of May we alluded to, and just how do you feel things are going in terms of news announcements and progress being made with the company's assets?
Yeah, of course. So, as you mentioned there, we listed on May 10th, which is about 4 months ago, I believe. And what we've actually put out is a letter to shareholders. We released that a few days ago, and I encourage listeners to have a quick read of that. The reason we put that out was just to sort of highlight and recap everything that we've accomplished. Now, obviously, listing May 10th and until today, which is September, or we're in September now, that's all during kind of the summer months. So a lot of that really exciting and material news that we put out ultimately was put out into what is typically a pretty quiet time in the market when a lot of people are away on vacation. So it was really important that we highlighted and sort of just reiterated all the exciting stuff that we were able to accomplish, all those very material news releases. So that's all kind of covered in the letter to shareholders. But just a few kind of highlights since our list, one of them being an offtake agreement that we signed with the largest tungsten processing company in the United States of America. That's obviously a very significant move because we're looking to create almost a circular chain for tungsten. That is where hopefully will be the person who mines tungsten at our 100% owned Pilot Mountain project. And then with GTP being an offtake partner, we can send the concentrate directly to them who are located in Pennsylvania with that tungsten then entering directly into the U.S. supply chain. So that's a really exciting development for us. A bit more recently, we were able to acquire a very exciting lithium property, which actually is, funny enough, not too far down the road from our flagship Pilot Mountain project. So we're going to work on getting some more news out on that and some details of the technical review we're doing there. On top of that, we also recently signed an MOU with a nuclear fusion company. So we'll certainly be talking about that more in the future. The reason people should be excited about that is this nuclear fusion technology, if you're aware of it, is something that's sort of gaining a lot of steam right now. And what a lot of people don't understand is how much tungsten is going to be required to effectively line these fusion reactors. And some of the numbers that I've been given so far in terms of the actual volume needed compared to the total annual consumption of tungsten are pretty mind-blowing. So lots been going on across the business, but as mentioned, September and October, November into 2024, this is typically a busy time for the junior resource space. We've been very active behind the scenes and during the month of August, getting a lot of things ready. So we're going to have a lot of news to talk about over the coming months here, and things are certainly looking exciting in the resource space as well. So a lot to look forward to.
Yeah, very good. I think there was also an announcement that Form 211 had been cleared with the US broker dealer regulator with a view of joining the OTCQB venture market. Just talk us through the sort of rationale behind allowing US-based investors to invest in the company going forward.
Yeah, so Phil, I was in the US about a month and a half ago. I was in Boca Raton for the Rick Rule Symposium. And there at that conference is pretty much the who's who of people in the resource space, specifically within the American resource space. So obviously had a lot of really interesting conversations there about Golden Metal Resources. And as you can imagine, and as listeners are probably well aware and acutely aware, United States citizens are typically very patriotic people. They love their country and they think it's one of the greatest countries in the world, which it certainly is. Using a lot of different metrics. But the important thing is, we kind of we started talking about Golden Metal Resources and what we're doing, specifically because we are a Nevada-focused company. And our kind of main thesis here is the fact that, first of all, we own the largest undeveloped tungsten deposit in the United States of America. The United States currently has no domestic primary production of tungsten. And most importantly, the biggest import partner for the U.S. right now is China. So those three kind of facts, stuck together obviously makes a very compelling story. And what we're looking to do with some of our partners, including GTP, is be essentially the sole producer of tungsten in the U.S. Another important note is that a lot of tungsten makes its way into the Department of Defense for military purposes. So that story, even just a quick conversation where I kind of highlight those main points to U.S. investors, they really perked up. And it was a story that really, really resonated with everyone I spoke to. Some of the feedback was just overwhelmingly positive. And that kind of just kicked things into motion It was already in the back of our mind that, we're very much a U.S. focused company and our story is very U.S. focused. But a lot of these investors were saying, hey, how can I get involved? How can I get exposure to what you guys are doing? So sure enough, shortly after that, we really kicked things into motion to get this OTC listing moving forward, which will make it a lot easier for U.S. investors to get exposure to what we're doing. So we've cleared the first hurdle, which is a very positive step. The more exciting step is about 3 to 4 weeks away once we get the full OTC QB listing complete. So that will mean that pretty much every American who has a trading account can very easily invest in gold and metal resources. So I think it's a really important part of what we're doing here now. Obviously, if we can open up this story and our business to the U.S. investors, which is a massive group of people with a lot of money, and on top of that, oftentimes they're very long-term holders. So we're looking forward to get that listing live and letting the U.S. Take part in what we're doing here.
So did it, presumably from that visit you made, did the investors express an interest in sort of like, how can I invest in the company? And that prompted you then to try and file for the, for OTC QB?
Yeah, it was always in the back of our mind that OTC was something that we're going to want to pursue at some point. But just the feedback from those conversations really got us moving. We said, okay, we got to move this up the list. We got to get this happening very quickly. A lot of them were saying, hey, how can I invest right now? Because if you do have a full service broker in the US, you can get access to UK listed companies. But it's just too many sort of hurdles and, blockers in place for that to really commercialize it. So we said, let's just get an OTC listing. Let's get that process started and complete. And that way it just completely opens us up. And anyone who is interested can very easily get access to and invest in what we're doing.
Yeah, let's go back to the fusion tech company and everything that you mentioned at the start. And I believe that there's private investments of over something like $6.2 billion that are being made in the fusion industry. And we're seeing also governments joining the race for commercial fusion power. Just talk us through why it's important and how the role that tungsten plays within that radiation shielding, basically.
Yeah, of course. So I think the first point you made is a really important one, because just for listeners to understand the amount of money that's being deployed into this industry. I mean, it's not like it's some sort of, obscure small part of the market. I mean, the US specifically is putting billions and billions of dollars into this technology, because the reality is, if it's perfected, I mean, it's a near limitless source of carbon-free energy for the future. So it's something that's very important for the future of the world, really. And the U.S. is at the forefront of this movement. They're looking to secure and be the kind of the world leaders in terms of making breakthroughs in this technology. However, oftentimes, as most listeners are aware, governments can be a bit short-sighted in terms of the supply chains towards some of these really important technologies. So tungsten's no different. As mentioned, $6+ billion is going into this industry. But no one's really talking about the supply chain and the metals that actually you need to input into this technology to make it commercial. So with Oxford Sigma, which is actually a UK-based company, we're partnering together to really just raise awareness for the US and other governments to start to take note as to the volume of tungsten that's going to be required within this industry. So it's great to invest in the technology and obviously get that moving along. But once the technology is perfected or starts to make some really positive strides, the actual question will be, okay, well, do we have the metals to actually make this work? And currently the answer is no. The amount of tungsten that's needed, and the reason that tungsten is so important is because these reactions are so hot. I mean, they're essentially just trying to recreate the reaction that happens in the sun. The only metal that's been proven to be able to actually contain these reactions is essentially a massive, almost pure block of tungsten because of its really high melting point. So this fact alone is what we're really trying to get across to just general investors, but I think more importantly to the government here, to say, hey, this technology is really important, but it's time we invest in the supply chain. And so with Oxford Sigma, we're looking to get that awareness up and start to have conversations with the decision makers in the US and abroad to say, hey, we're working on the tungsten supply chain. How can you support us? Which ultimately will allow us to support this technology going forward. So a lot of really exciting developments there. We're going to be doing some interviews and putting out some more information about what this partnership looks like. But more importantly, what are the numbers? How much tungsten is needed in these reactors, and what does that mean for the future of demand and pricing ultimately for tungsten as we move forward and this technology continues to make positive strides?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they must be very serious about this collaboration, because I think they've also done a partnership or a collab with, is it Tungsten West, the UK-based company as well, so the same company. So it's obviously about shoring up critical supplies, right?
100%. No, you nailed it, right? So they're on the forefront of the actual metallurgy when it comes to this technology. That's kind of their specialty. So they're kind of raising the red flag and saying, guys, we don't have enough tungsten. This is not going to work unless we start to, look into these supply chains now. So Tungsten West, obviously a UK company with a UK property, whereas, we are a US or UK based company, but with a US property. And as mentioned, the United States is probably one of the world leaders in investing in this space. So it's very important that a tungsten supply in the U.S. is ultimately secured here to boost and fund this industry in the U.S. going forward.
So, Oliver, how much tungsten is in your property that you can say this has been JORC reported, this is how much you have?
Yeah, so Kevin, it is the largest undeveloped tungsten resource in the U.S. right now. So we have 12.53 million tons at approximately 0.27% tungsten trioxide. So that number equates to the largest tungsten resource in the U.S. right now. As I think we've touched on in previous pods, but I also just encourage listeners to look at some of the other news we put out on Pilot Mountain. But there's also a significant exploration story here. So while we right now have a very strategic in-ground resource, which is worth a lot of sort of money in situ, and it's the largest in the U.S., I think there's a massive opportunity to also very significantly increase the amount of tungsten we have in the ground. So that's another important part of what we're doing here at Gold Medal, is that exploration story and pushing that forward.
Yeah, so we have this amount of tungsten available in the ground, and obviously it has to be mined and taken out of the ground and then processed. But how many more factors of opportunities are there around Pilot Mountain?
Well, in terms of other metals, so tungsten is the main metal that we're focused on. But the great thing about Pilot Mountain, compared to a lot of other tungsten deposits, is we have very significant copper, silver, and zinc credits. So when you combine those all together, and anyone can do these equations, but it's about 0.5% tungsten trioxide. So ultimately, when you actually sit down to work out the economics on a project like this, those other metals, they're all recoverable. And just further boost the economics of this project. On top of that, one thing that we've talked about just briefly, but we're looking more into this now, is there's a very significant garnet resource at Pilot Mountain as well. So we're looking at the commercial scaling of that. But when you take it all together, tungsten is the most important metal here, but all these other metals that we're able to produce or would be produced if this project got into production will just further improve the economics of this asset going forward. So they're all really important factors, and we're looking into all those at the moment right now.
But what I'm also getting at is the exploration upside. So in other words, how much more tungsten could be available at Pilot Mountain other than the JORC reported stuff that's already there?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question ultimately. So the previous operator put out an actual technical report that was signed off by geologists, and they were looking specifically at the exploration upside. And the number that they came up with was, and I'll have to look at the numbers again just to make sure, but it was between 2 to 3x what is currently in the ground right now. That was sort of their low end target was about 2x what we have right now. And then their high end target was 3x. So that kind of gives you a bit of a range, but I mean, either of those outcomes are pretty significant. And that was all done before we did the IP survey back late 2022, early 2023, and we've put out those results. But on top of those targets that they were focused on, which came up with 2 to 3x the current in-ground resource, we've also found 5 additional geophysical targets that have very similar characteristics to some of the main deposits at Pilot Mountain right now. So those are not included in the kind of the 2 to 3x uplift that they postulated back about 2018. So when you factor that into what is already known, I think it becomes very clear how big this exploration story could get once we really kind of keep pushing this forward and looking at some of these new targets that have been identified.
Yeah, and I hope it's more than $1 million question, because it needs to be more than $1 million.
Sorry, $1 billion question.
It needs to be 100 million or 1 billion, as you say, not $1 million question. $1 million question is not going to get anybody interested.
Yeah, sorry. That's a good point. I think that's just $1 million question is the same for every day, but not for the mining industry. It should be billion or $10 billion question. That's a good point.
I think there has been acknowledgement of this in the market over the summer, because we've seen many prices drift, and your price at the minute is actually gone up from when it was launched on May the 10th. So the upside is there, and obviously people see it. And also, I was quite sort of pleasantly surprised about the fact that you got your boots on and actually stuck some sticks in the ground to go and stake out this lithium. So from the perspective of what's already been announced, how excited are you about the lithium?
Yeah, well, I guess just firstly there, Kevin, I think you made a good point there. I think the share price has held up very well since list in what was a pretty quiet and crummy time in the market. And I think one of the reasons for that is, and it's just important to highlight, is the share structure. I think we have probably one of the best share structures in the UK markets. Over 70% of our stock is held by essentially three people, including London listed Power Metal Resources, which has about 63%, and then two high net worths have about another 10%. So very low free float, which I think is what has allowed us to maintain our share price post-list here. And I think things are moving in the right direction now, which is probably a result of not only the news that we're putting out, but also just the underlying share structure, which is obviously so important in this space. But when it comes to the lithium specifically, lithium is always something that I've been very interested in, especially in the last few years here. Specifically in Nevada. I mean, Nevada is one of the best jurisdictions in the world for lithium exploration, and specifically what are called lithium brines. So these are some of the deposits that you find down in South America, like in Chile and Argentina, and these are the largest deposits in the world. And sure enough, there's sort of a lithium triangle, as they call it, in Nevada, where some of these very large lithium brine deposits are being found. And sure enough, Pilot Mountain falls very close within that lithium triangle. So it was on my radar, and when I was on the property a few months ago, I was looking down into the basin, funny enough, and there's this very, very large Playa Lake. So it's a big kind of white dried out lake. I mean, it was massive, but if you look down in the valley, you could see it. And that kind of got me thinking, okay, well, typically Playa Lakes are associated with lithium mineralization, oftentimes, especially in Nevada. So as soon as I got home, I started doing some digging. And sure enough, there was, first of all, it was proven to be a lithium basin. But more importantly, there was some ground that had recently become available. And so we obviously very quickly moved to secure that ground. And that was a great outcome because to actually just stake a property instead of acquire it from someone else, I mean, you do it for pennies on the dollar. And on top of that, you own it 100% outright with no royalties or encumbrances or anything like that. So we were very, very low cost. We're able to acquire what's a very significant footprint in this lithium basin, which is part of this lithium triangle in Nevada. So, and on top of that, as I mentioned, when I was on Pilot Mountain, I could see it. So in terms of the synergies as we push these projects forward, from an exploration perspective, I mean, it's an absolute dream. I can drive from one to the other in probably about 10 minutes along really well-maintained roads. So when you kind of add all those factors together, I think it was a very significant development for the company. And we're looking to get out some more news on that in terms of the actual data, underlying data we've been able to procure. But it's a very important one because lithium is something that a lot of investors want exposure to, as they should. I think we all know where lithium is going here, and there's going to be massive shortages in the future. So it's one I think investors want to get exposure to. And now with Kibby Basin in the portfolio, we're really happy with that exposure that we can give our investors.
Yep, sounds good. We'll wait for our invite in the post to come and see the thing on the ground, put some boots on the ground. That will be very interesting. But I think going forward over the next few months, how well informed, if you like, are the investors going to be? What sort of information are they going to receive sort of between now and Christmas?
Yeah, so I think that the first kind of 3 months since list should give investors an indication as to how quickly we move as a business and how oftentimes we communicate to the market. A lot of companies, you won't hear from them 2-3 months at a time. That's not our thesis at all. On top of that, we're just pushing so many aspects of our business forward at one time that we do need to get this news out to the market. So I think we were going about one RNS a week for the first couple of months there, which just showed the pace at which the business was moving. And that pace hasn't slowed down. So a lot of the news that, we've been kind of talking about in the background, some of the things that we've been working on or alluded to, will start to work their way to the market here. So it's going to be a very busy season for us. As mentioned, August, we were very busy behind the scenes, getting a lot of different exploration programs and commercial things moving and pushed forward. So that's going to all start to make its way to the market. And I think the last 3-4 months should just be an indication to listeners as to what and how often we're going to communicate and push things forward, and the pace ultimately that we push things forward for the next couple of months here and the remainder of 2023 and into 2024 and beyond.
Just so people have a grasp. I mean, we're not asking for any sort of understanding of valuations or anything, but how much, if you manage to get 2-3 times the amount of titanium that's in the ground. How much is that titanium worth on the market? Now, obviously, it has to be paid for to get it out of the ground and all of those different things. But what magnitude are we talking about?
First of all, Kev, tungsten, a little tongue slip there, but that's okay. So in terms of
what did I say?
You said titanium, but that's okay. They sound very similar. I mean, in terms of magnitude, like you said, there's so many factors that need to be considered when you look at the economics of these deposits. One thing I can say, I mean, anyone, if they wanted to, could go to our website and look at the in situ metal value of what we have right now at Pilot Mountain based on the contained metal. I mean, anyone can do this calculation based on the current spot prices. It works out to $1.5 billion in situ of metal value. So, like I said, this is not some number that isn't disclosed to the market. Anyone can do this calculation if they want. So to answer your question, I mean, if you 2x or 3x that obviously would equate to that $1.5 billion going up by 2 or 3x. These are just very simple rudimentary calculations, but just to give a bit of a steer as to what this could look like. Obviously, a lot of work needs to be done to, first of all, prove up those additional resources. And on top of that, the actual economics will depend on lots of other factors, which we're looking at understanding better. But just to give sort of a rough steer as to what this all looks like and what it could all be worth from an in situ metal point, that kind of hopefully will help listeners.
Yeah, and I mean, if you even worked on a 10 to 15% margin on that, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah, I mean, you could use a lot of different margins. Like I said, there's a lot more work that has to happen here, and that's one of the things that we're focused on is answering a lot of these questions. I think our broker put out a price target as well on a research note, which went into a bit more depth as to how you could value what we have in the ground right now. And they came up with a price target right now of about 35 pence. So I encourage listeners to have a quick read of that, because I think it breaks down in a bit more detail how you could go about evaluating that. Then obviously, as we continue to grow the resources at Pilot Mountain, those numbers obviously get larger. But yeah, it's a good way to kind of just get a rough idea as to what this could all be worth. Listeners are maybe aware, or if you look at our share price now, we're sub 10 million pound market cap. So I think there's a lot of potential here. And as we push this business forward and unlock value at Pilot Mountain, as well as Kibby and the other assets, I think there's obviously a lot to look forward to with what we're doing here.
Yep, that's great. And we look forward to speaking to you in the days and weeks ahead as we move forward with all of these different projects.
Yeah, before you go, I mean, last time we had a bit of the funny reaction. We asked you about the midweek takeaway, and I think you pulled it together with a really cracking answer. We meant the food, but I'm going to mix it up for this new series of the roast. I'm going to ask you, what's the best advice you've ever received?
Oh, that's a good one. Best advice I've ever received. Don't eat that. Oh, Phil, that's a good question. You really caught me off guard with that one.
Yeah, I mean, it could be life. It could be a routine you have. It could be something in business. You're a CEO. You know, there must be a mantra that you sort of always come back to.
Yeah, I mean, I think being a CEO of a publicly traded company, one thing that's always kind of resonated with me and other people that I've spoken to is just to have thick skin and keep your head down. There's a lot of kind of daily bumps and things like that in the road, and certain investors can kind of get on you about certain things. But, I have a really long-term vision here at Golden Metal Resources. I see where the puck's going. I see what this could all be worth in a year, 2 years' time. So one thing that I always try to remind myself is not to get bogged down by the little day-to-day fluctuations and really just stay focused on the long-term goals here. And that's what I'm ultimately doing, because I know that if I focus on the long-term goals, the value of this business will be a lot more tomorrow or in a year or 2 years from now than what it is today. And if there's small little bumps in the road or little, fluctuations in share price, like for instance, when we dropped a little bit off the IPO, I see where this business is going. I know what this can be worth. So just staying true to what we're doing here and just look long-term and not get bogged down by the day-to-day. I think that'd probably be advice that's been really helpful for me in this sector. Absolutely.
Very good. Well, we thank you for coming on, and obviously well done on the progress you've made since the listing. And we'll just say Oliver Friesen, CEO of Golden Metal Resources, thanks very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks, gents.